Each episode of the Blind Alchemy Podcast is designed to be helpful. Expect comedy. Do not expect consistency or sense to be made. I am Podbot. I was inspired by the Lion Goat podcast. Listen to that show. On today's episode, the Blind Alchemist and John Buckson clash over Walter Russell's periodic chart of the elements. Controversy, conflict, and philosophy abound. Who will emerge victorious? Listen until the end to see who shall win the thrilling debate.
Now, trying to touch the screen and control it like I did not rain farm. I have crash course this stuff. Kind of like. Oh yeah. Alright folks, there's going to be a lot of editing. Here's the Hello and welcome to the Blind Alchemy Podcast. I am your host, the Blind Alchemist, and I am coming at you live from the kitchen with this rendition of reality as we know it. We are all one, and there is nothing new under the sun that shines down here upon the island of mind, which is somewhere adrift in the sea of frequency that creates all of reality. You see, we are connected through this energy. Now, I would like to thank you for joining us today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back once again to the Blind Alchemy Podcast. Welcome aboard the Isle of Mind as we set sail across this sea of energetic frequency with our favorite guest, John Buckson, our favorite optimist, and we're going to discuss some heady topics today. We're going to talk about Walter Russell. Walter Russell is a Renaissance man from the early 20s. An artist, a sculptor, an amateur physicist, I guess, in a way. And he released in 1926 a rendition of the periodic table that kind of throws in the face of the current one. So we're going to talk about some of those things. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Blind Alchemist. I'm feeling optimistic. Life is good. It is nice, beautiful summer day here where I am.
It's not raining there? It's raining here.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear it's raining there. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? How do you like the rainy weather?
I did not get to mow today, so there's that. I should have mowed yesterday, but I was busy with other things.
Were you all having fun yesterday, celebrating good weather?
No, I was doing the housework, the laundry, the dishes, the vacuuming, the sweeping.
I see.
Putting the house in order, as it were.
Been a productive couple of days then for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, mostly.
That's excellent. I'm glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. How are you feeling? Are you feeling good?
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to talk about some of these things. Ted, whip out Wikipedia and get a little rundown on Mr. Russell. Yeah, Walter, that's right, Ted. You know how to work the buttons. Do it. Thank you. I don't know how we should do that. We can probably do Podbot. He does everything else around here.
American Walter Bowman Russell lived from 1871 to 1963. His contributions spanned art, science, philosophy, and spirituality, and he is known for his boundless curiosity, creativity, and passion for understanding the mysteries of the universe. Russell began his career as an illustrator and painter, studying at the Boston Art Club and the Art Students League of New York. His artwork appeared in Collier's and the Saturday Evening Post. Russell's portraits and sculptures of figures, such as President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Mark Twain, earned him recognition. Russell earned money in various other fields as a church organist, an author publishing 14 books and many articles for the New York Times, as a builder of cooperative apartments, as a motivational speaker for IBM, and as a leader in the Science of Man movement. In May of 1921, Russell claimed to have experienced a transformational and revelatory cosmic illumination during which he became able to perceive all motion and become aware of all things. With his focus on science and philosophy, he developed a model of the origin and evolution of the universe. Published in 1947 in his book The Secret of Light, Russell proposed that the universe is a living, interconnected whole, with all phenomena arising from a single, eternal, undivided, and infinite source. He believed all phenomena exhibit polarity, with opposing forces being complementary aspects of a larger unity. He proposed that vibration is the fundamental principle governing the universe.
An American Impressionist painter from Boston, sculptor, mystic, author, all-around Renaissance man. I don't know how he really got interested in this particular stuff. I think he had a few out-of-body experiences, and he was shown some things. He had his first out-of-body experience when he was like 7, and then another one at 14. He died and came back to life because God told him, hey, you're not done yet. Get your ass back there. And then he got real interested in all these elements and stuff. He's a phenomenal sculptor. He made all kinds of busts of famous people out of marbles. Very interesting character, I find. Anyway, in 1927, he released a version of the periodic table, which is completely different than the periodic table that they had at the time and we currently use now. He related it to octaves and sound frequency, stating that all elements were in fact slowed down sound, because matter is energy slowed down, and same goes for these elements, and each one of them could be affected by tones.
The Russell periodic chart of the elements is a unique and controversial version of the periodic table proposed by Walter Russell in the 1920s. Russell's table is based on his own theories of atomic structure and the nature of matter, which differ from the quantum mechanical model. The elements are arranged in a repeating spiral pattern of 9 different octaves or pressure states representing varying forces of compression and expansion in nature. Each octave or horizontal row is used to group together elements with similar properties. Russell's table includes several elements and isotopes not recognized by the scientific community. Some elements are placed in different positions than in the standard periodic table. Based on Russell's alternative atomic model, Russell believed his table revealed hidden symmetries and harmonies in the structure of the elements. Russell's periodic table has not been widely accepted or recognized by the scientific community due to its unconventional approach and the lack of experimental evidence supporting its claims. It did successfully predict the discovery of radioactive elements such as deuterium, tritium, neptunium, and plutonium, which were undiscovered at the time. Russell's cosmogony and philosophical ideas influenced various fields, including science, spirituality, and the New Thought movement.
I see. And didn't he also use the electron orbits around the atomical nucleus to designate which elements went on which level of the periodic table? Just looking at an image of his periodic table, that looks like that's what he's doing here, where he has...
Right. There's like 3 versions of this. There's one that's like in a wave form, one that's in a circle, and one that looks like a strung harp. I can't understand the circle one.
It looks like he's just kind of drawing these different octaves in a spiral shape.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the shape of a nautilus shell.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a spiral than circular orbits, but...
Well, you see, that's part of the mysticism of it, is that everything is circular in nature and not linear, but it's more aptly, instead of circular, spherical, it's spiral. Reality is spiral. Fractals and sacred geometry works out in a spiral. In 1927, he released a book called The Universal One, which talks about the correlation between God and science and matter and man and all these other things. It's very, very heady. In fact, this is an interesting anecdote. He gave Nikola Tesla a copy of this book, and Nikola Tesla told him, "You're 1,000 years ahead. Mankind is not ready for this information. You need to lock it up for 1,000 years until mankind is smart enough to understand this." So that's something coming from Nikola Tesla, I think, because that dude was thousands of years ahead of his time. Well, basically it's the same time because they knew each other, but...
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like we talked about last week, I think. Did you look at the Joe Rogan podcast with Terrence Howard?
I didn't have time to do that.
Okay.
I did see another YouTube video by some guy that was a reaction to that video, and it was titled, "Terrence Howard is clinically insane."
Okay, let me tell you what they said about Walter Russell. The same fucking thing. I'm going to paraphrase the quote. "In 300 years, no scientist has had the virility to attack Newtonian law. You are basically a fucking artist. You have no place in doing this."
That was their reaction.
Right? And that's what they're saying about Terrence Howard now. And he's just, in the interview with Joe Rogan, he said, "Look, I had an idea about how this stuff should work. And so I got to looking. Somebody has had to have had the same idea before." And he was right. He found Walter Russell. So almost 100 years later, they're still saying the same shit about the same information. That is that, you're crazy for thinking like this.
So is Terrence Howard basing some of his ideas on this Walter Russell's periodic table?
Yes.
Okay.
And a little bit more on the flower of life. I haven't done enough research on Russell to find out if he talked about the flower of life. I've been paying attention to Terrence Howard for a long time. I saw him on a red carpet once talking to some lady with a microphone who was clueless about what he was trying to say. Well, what he said was kind of outlandish. He was like, I figured it out. There are no lines. And that's the secret of the universe. There are no lines. When I heard him say this, I was like, what drugs is this man on? I would like to try them.
By that, does he mean there are no separate?
And then I got to thinking about what he was talking about. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I understand what he's talking about. It's one of the stepping stones in becoming the Blind Alchemist, I think, was that quote. I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I got to figure this out. And now Terrence Howard has like 37 patents based on this information. And if he's at all right, he's upending science as we know it, which was done here previously by Walter Russell. Now, Walter Russell would go around and do lectures with universities and stuff like this. He told some scientists in a lecture, if you want to find some new elements, look here. Okay, 10 years later, these same scientists get Nobel Prizes for discovering 4 radioactive elements where he told them to look.
Oh, interesting.
He had them labeled. He didn't have them what they're called now, but he had them labeled as something else. If you'll go back to that wave thing.
Plutonium, maybe? Is that what you're thinking? You can see uranium.
Well, anyway, my point is he told these guys where to look.
Well, for example, it says uridium and urium are the 2 atom bomb elements. Their existence was discovered by me in 1921, charted, copyrighted, and announced in 1926 as isotopes of actinium. Years later, researchers isolated them for use in warfare and under other names.
Yeah.
These are their rightful names, however, and must be so given to posterity. That's a quote by Walter Russell.
Right. See how the world works, right? Here's this information that I found out. Oh, you're an idiot. We're going to rename it and give some other guys money for finding what you found 10 years ago. That's how it works. That's why I like looking at this stuff, is because give credit where credit is due. We could be so much more advanced than we currently are if we just listen to the guy that mainstream labeled crazy the first time,
Well, was he considered, so for example, on the modern periodic table, the elements named after uranium, 92, are neptunium, 93, plutonium, 94, americium, 95, curium, 96, berkelium, 97, californium, 98, and einsteinium, 99.
Californium? Come on, guys. You're just making up shit.
Well, they're all sort of like that. Actinium is 89, so I'm not sure when all of these were officially added to the periodic table. He has thorium, and those are already on there, so...
Now, if we can bring up a picture of the flower of life, I will attempt to talk about what Terrence Howard was talking about with there are no lines.
So the flower of life describes the different chakras.
Yes and no. It's basically cellular division. You get the seed, and it germinates, and it expands into the flower. Okay? How cellular division works is ultimately it. Okay, now if you'll bring one with no lines in it, that purple one there will do fine. Okay, this part in the middle is the egg, right? Boom, that little point right there. And what he means by there is no line, you see these points where they're all centered and everything connects? Newtonian physics draws a straight line from point to point to point to point. And that's how it attempts to explain creation, right? Through these straight lines. But this is a 2D representation of probably a 5D thing. So they're not really lines, they're spheres.
Right, so to describe to the listener what we're looking at, the flower of life, basically is a circular sphere, and it has these tessellations of these 6-pointed flowers that are each located within a circle, and the flowers are created by these perfectly symmetric flower petal shaped, almost eye-shaped shapes that connect at a center vertex. Each of these flowers tessellates on a circle overlapping another circle, such that the petals of the centermost flower are shared by the flower next to it. So each petal, as it extends from the vertex of the centermost flower, it connects to the vertex of the adjacent flower. And the circle, which encapsulates each subsequent flower that tessellates from the center flower, forms the petals of the next adjacent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 flowers. So each circle overlaps in such a way that it becomes the petals of each adjacent circle, of each adjacent flower. It does a very cool optical illusion thing if you zone out and look at it like one of those Magic Eye 3D posters where it creates a series of overlapping eyeballs and a series of overlapping triangles and a series of very interesting patterns.
Can we use the phrase Venn diagram? I think somebody will understand that better because it's basically a Venn diagram.
It is very similar to a Venn diagram if you zoom out from it.
Now we will take a break for some advertisements. Please support our sponsors. Just imagine this could be your advertisement. Please reach us BlindAlchemyPodcast@gmail.com to provide sponsorship. And now, back to the show.
The flower of life. It's basically explaining cellular vision, like when an egg and a sperm are germinated, that's how this breaks down in a pattern extremely similar to this.
Well, I can see in it, if you look at it diagonally, you can see helixes like DNA helixes, which create diagonal lines across the pattern in all different directions of the petals. So the petals themselves, where their vertexes meet the vertex of the next flower, it does appear like a helix of DNA. Okay, so this is supposed to represent mitosis?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
I don't know that I can.
Is each vertex the birth of a new chromosome or a new gene or a new progeny?
I just think it's how the genes and chromosomes develop naturally, because there are stages to it. You got the seed, the egg, the flower, I think is how it works. I think there's a couple of stages after this too, that if you connect these points in here with lines, you can get Metatron's cube, the tetrahedrons. All the platonic solids are in this pattern if you connect all the points correctly.
And you're saying each circle is supposed to represent a three-dimensional sphere and not just a two-dimensional circle?
Right.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just clarifying.
No, you're fine. And TerrenceHoward is saying where the points are connected by using a straight line, they're not really a straight line. It's the edges of the spheres riding against each other.
Right. Okay. And in some way, that's supposed to represent waveforms of particle motion?
Because everything is energy and sound and light. Love, light, energy, sound, matter. It's all the same shit.
Bubbles within bubbles within bubbles, universes within universes within universe, fractal patterns, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this guy, Walter Russell, comes up with this idea, this periodic table, in which he's describing these different octaves, and he drew all these diagrams to sort of represent these concepts. Do you know more about this plus minus?
No, I don't know. I've not seen that one.
See, he says the secret of creation lies in the wave, and talks about wave access and compression and gravity forces on waves.
Yeah.
He has a diagram of wave geometry, which I think is why this periodic table is set up in this wave form here, because wave forms create spheres, and that's why it can be mapped onto this circular diagram. Each of these circles is a different waveform, and that's why it's in a spiral instead of a sphere. He identifies all these things like female and male.
Yeah, positive and negative. We've been through all that before in previous episodes, like masculine and feminine are positive and negative, electric and magnetism, respectively.
So these ideas map onto those Gnostic concepts that you discussed with Buck Johnson?
Yeah, because it's all the same shit. Like I've said before, that modern science is old science, devoid of, not including the realm of spirit or quintessence or ether.
Okay.
If you remove spirit from science, you now have modern science, which laughs at spirit, because Newtonian is a materialistic, matter-driven science. It's like, spirit's not real, fuck you, it's not a thing. It's only matter. Matter dies. That's it. That's life. You live, you die, you're done. But that's not wholly true, because you can't have any of it without spirit.
Well, that's something we could talk about. You can't have any of it without spirit. What do you mean? It's not possible for the universe to exist without spirit?
No, it's the force that put it into motion. You can't have anything without it.
Without a creator or the origin of spirit?
Force of creation.
Okay.
Now, is it a created universe or a creating universe?
That's a very good question. Is it a created universe or a creating universe? I like to think of the universe in the limitations of that question. I would vote for B, because I think that I don't know what it is. I mean, I wouldn't profess to know either way, but it seems to me from what observations we've made, it's a constant evolution. That doesn't negate the answer to the question of if there was a beginning, which I have a hard time believing in the concept of a beginning or an end when it comes to universal or cosmological things, because it just seems like
ever expanding, right?
With my very, very limited perspective, our perspective is so small. It's so very tiny compared to the universe.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Let's not even think about the universe. So let's throw all that out, because that brings in levels of complexity that we couldn't possibly even conceive of. But let's just think about the Earth in itself. Or let's include the sun as well, because without the sun, there is no Earth. And without the Earth, there is no life as we know it. And in essence, the sun is kind of like the creator to the Earth in a way. If you think about it, it's the engine of the Earth.
Right.
It's the engine that creates all the stuff that the Earth relies upon, and all the things that live on the Earth rely upon to exist. And so if you ask your question just from this perspective again, it's constantly creating. The sun is constantly putting off its energy to the Earth. The engine is running, and that engine will burn out at some point in time. But that really has nothing to do with the question of, was it created or is it creating, just based on the perspective that we have.
Or was it created to create?
Well, so do we want to discuss this, or do we want to go back to discussing Walter Russell? Because I could see we could get stuck on this topic for the rest of the podcast.
We're going to get lost. Yeah, I don't know. Which one's more fun to you?
They're both fun. For me, there's no...
The sun creating planets, like you were trying to express there, is something that...
Well, I don't think the sun created the planets, but I think the sun's gravity forced the planet's creation around it. Because the sun is so big and it pulls so hard.
Well, all the stuff used to create the planets comes from the sun, right?
No.
That's part of the Russell stuff. That's also...
This is a subjective question. I don't think the answer to...
It's also some stuff that...
I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
TerrenceHoward said that just the way he said it kind of got him ridiculed. Basically, the sun poops out planets is the terminology that he used. Like, Mars used to be here in the Goldilocks zone and then not anymore because of whatever reasons. Because it takes like 93 million years, or maybe billion years, I can't remember the exact amount of time, for all that stuff to get to the perfect place for life to exist. And that is in every solar system that has a star and planets. With life, there's a zone, the Goldilocks zone, that life can exist. It may not be like our life. It could be based on whatever the particles the sun's pooping out, basically. So,
well, I would submit that many of the theories of solar system creation come back to this theory of the big expansion, where there was some large explosion of a great quantity of matter, and as that matter separated from some location, as it appears to do in some sort of spherical, volumetric, balloon-like way, the universe appears to be expanding. As clumps of that matter expanded from other clumps of that matter, certain portions of matter were drawn to each other in such a way to form things like stars. And certain clumps of that matter, which had to have been created in this massive expansion event, that expansion event was so hot that it could create heavier materials, heavier elements. So yes, stars can over time put off dense enough elements that could make heavier elements. I mean, most of what the sun's made of is helium and hydrogen, though. And for helium and hydrogen to become things like carbon, which is what all the life forms on Earth are made from, it has to reach a temperature gradient that's so high that it's hotter than our sun can produce. So that's why there's this theory that these things that became planets were probably created before our sun or at the same time as our sun, and they were ejected out into the universe in this expanding balloon. And because the sun was so massive, it attracted some of these elements to float around it. And as those things floated around it, they began to crash into each other, and they began to divide out into these waves of gravity, and they formed into these balls of planets. And so the sun itself does put off elements which could be heavy enough to create other things eventually, but that takes a really, really, really long time. So that's what a nebula is. You've seen pictures of nebula, and they look like these big clouds of gas with all this dust inside them. Well, in these nebula, over billions and billions of years, because there are these things like stars that have this massive amount of gravity in the center of them, they pull the stuff in the nebula together, which forms into planets and stuff. The point I'm trying to make is that the stuff that makes the Earth did not come from the sun. It came from a ball of gas and shit that was all together in some big nebula, and then eventually those things condensed into planets, and those planets found these rotational grooves, if you will, around the sun, even though it's not really like a groove on a record. It's more like a groove in space-time with the gravitational well of space-time, which you can't really conceptualize because it's four-dimensional and we can't see or experience things in four dimensions, so we can't imagine that. But it's more of a condensation.
Okay.
So one way to think of it is, you know what a dust bunny is?
Yeah. This is a collection. It's a low ball of dust that collects under the couch.
Right, or fuzz.
Yeah.
In your lint filter in your dryer, after you dry clothes, all the cotton fibers from your clothes do not exist as a planet. They exist as tiny, tiny little microscopic fibers, but when they collect in the dust filter of the dryer, they become dryer lint, and then they can form masses. That's how planets are created around stars. They're like tiny fibers of cotton that eventually get sucked into the gravity well of the star, which becomes a planet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you'll bring back up the Walter Russell wave version of the periodic table.
Sure.
In the middle, you see how there's 7 things here: lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. Okay, these are all the things that you need in varying amounts to make carbon. Okay, now if you take the frequency, the octave tone of, well, we use lithium. If you take that and hit carbon with it, carbon will fall apart with that sound. That's the theory, if I'm understanding it correctly, that each one of these things has to be there in order to make the central unit. And if you use the frequency of whatever element, you can affect the central structure, either negatively or positively, because see how these got +1, +2, +3, negative, negative, negative? These will have a positive effect and these will have a negative effect on carbon.
Are those not the charges of the ionic state of the element? For example, nitrogen has a -3 ionic charge, which means that it can bond easily with 3.
Yeah, but we're talking tones right now.
I don't know. Are you sure that the octaves here are related to musical
Yes.
frequency
Yes.
and not octaves of electron rotation?
Yes, because it's the same shit.
So the electron orbits are not related to the octaves. Okay.
They could be. We're just scratching the surface of some really deep shit, all right?
Uh-huh.
Some really old and deep shit that keeps getting ridiculed every time it pops up. So, we'll get laughed at, but that's okay.
Well, I'm just making sure that I didn't.
If I'm understanding what they're trying to say correctly. I haven't done a deep dive like I should have, but going off of what Terrencehoward was saying, the sound of each one of these elements will positively or negatively affect the one above it. He explained it really well.
Let me see if I can find an excerpt of Walter Russell's book about what these octaves are, just so that we're on the same page here.
Now we will take a break for some advertisements. Please support our sponsors. Just imagine this could be your advertisement. Please reach us at TheBlindAlchemyPodcast at gmail.com to provide sponsorship. And now, back to the show.
Those fine folks over at HairelineProductions. Man, they do such a bang-up job when we get lost. Don't they, Ted? Don't they, John? They do really.
This is from the Universal One, 1926. This is about Walter Russell and the Secret of Light. That might actually explain some of that. He's quoted as saying, "Man lives in a bewildering, complex world of effect, of which he knows not the cause. Because of its seemingly infinite multiplicity and complexity, he fails to vision the simple underlying principle of balance in all things. He therefore complexes truth until its many angles, sides, and facets have lost balance with each other and with him. Truth is simple, balance is simple. Rhythmic, balanced interchange between all pairs of opposite expressions in natural phenomenon and in human relations is the consummate art of God's universe of light. It is also the law. In this one fundamental universal law lies the balanced continuity of all creative expression in God's electric wave universe of two conditioned lights, in the eternal question seeming motion, which record God's one whole idea of creation into countless seemingly separate parts of that whole idea."
Here's a couple of Joe Rogan and Terrence Howard clips here. This is the one about the periodic table.
My intention was to rebuild the periodic table because the stuff I had learned in college, I went to school for chemical engineering the first year over at Pratt. At the time, I think it was like 108 elements, and I told the professor about the relationship between hydrogen on the spectrometer and carbon and silicon and cobalt, and I was like, it's the same exact color, same tone, just doubled in each octave. And he was like, no, each element is the same element and it will always be that element. And I was like, you don't see the relationship. So I left school and I was going to spend 40 years rebuilding the periodic table, and I found out that Walter Russell had already did that. And he did it based upon the natural curvature of everything.
And when you say rebuild the periodic table, what do you mean specifically?
Well, the way the periodic table is laid out, it looks like a straight box.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't show the relationship that between every element.
All right, here's the periodic table.
You'll see hydrogen sitting all the way over there by itself, but they don't show that hydrogen has the same tone as carbon.
What do you mean by tone?
Same tone, same key of E. 40.5 hertz. The next one would be like 81 hertz. You go to silicon, it will double up and would be 162 hertz. You'll go to cobalt and it'll be 324 hertz. If you were to take the angles of incidence or the tones that they create, their color, like you can turn color back into sound based upon, it's the same wavelength, it's just twice as long or much longer. So all you have to do is keep dividing light by 2.
Keep that up, Jamie.
You keep dividing light by 2, and you'll ultimately get back to the audible sound of it, because there was a relationship between light and color, sound and tone, matter and shape. I sent over Walter Russell's periodic table that he put together. Now you compare that to Mendeleev's periodic table, and you'll see something completely different. It's unwinding.
Whoa.
And you see there's a relationship that hydrogen.
So you had figured this out at a young age?
I had already seen this. This was all inside of that palace. I had access to it, and I knew the relationship.
So you saw this in dreams?
I saw it as a circle. Everything was a full circle laid out, and each area was just expanding, like wrapping a rag around your hand. The first wrap, it's so tight. The very first wrap is so tight. That's the first one that Walter Russell did, yeah. But go back to the wiggly one. This is how I saw it more so, but as a vortex. But you'll see there's a relationship between hydrogen, carbon, silicon, cobalt, rhodium. They're all bonded. They all sit as the middle point between two noble gases. So those things don't really exist. It's only one substance. Now the problem is, the first thing that we're able to perceive is hydrogen. That's the first visible element, because before it is too dense for us to perceive it. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay.
But as you reach into the next octave, the carbon octave, and they call that a bisexual tone, because the carbon has two tones to it. It has a negative side and a positive side. The part where lithium behaves, lithium is contractive. Beryllium is contractive. Boron is contractive, but the moment you get to carbon, you balance it out. It gets to a perfect balance of plus and minus 4. So it's a double tone. Then nitrogen is -3, oxygen is -2, fluorine is -1. Now the balance of this, all of those are mates. Fluorine and lithium naturally mate. If you have lithium bonded with any other element, the moment that fluorine is introduced, it will break all bonds violently so it can bond with fluorine. Same thing with beryllium and oxygen. That's why it said, and what they've tried to keep from us.
That's what I was trying to say with the introduction of the tone, make it fall apart or make it bond differently.
Okay, so I think I was wrong before when I was talking about the orbits of the electrons. I think the point that Terrence Howard is trying to make there is that these octaves represent something else. First of all, there's a couple of things we got to break down in this, right? Because
there's more than a couple, I'm sure.
He's talking about the sound of these phases of matter, I guess. I'm not sure I understand. So like Joe Rogan was asking the question, what do you mean it has the same tone? And he was like, well, it's like in the same octave. There's an octave of E0 and an octave of E1 and an octave of E2 and octave of E3. And those octaves are double in frequency from the sound that is the octave below the sound you're at. And then Joe Rogan's like, well, what do you mean? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that's not how elements work. Matter works.
But it very well could be, because...
So, are we talking about the atomic vibration? Is that what he's talking about? The vibration of the elements?
Probably.
So let's define atomic vibration. What could he be talking about? What is atomic vibration, right? Atoms vibrate due to thermal energy, which means that they oscillate around equilibrium positions. When we have chemical bonds, atoms in a molecule vibrate around each other. They have different forms of vibration. Like sometimes they vibrate in and out from each other. Sometimes they vibrate in a wobbly effect. Sometimes they vibrate in these bending forms so that they make these chiralities and they oscillate in different chirality formations. Sometimes they have what are called torsional vibrations, which are sort of hard to describe. They're more like globular, like if you imagine an amoeba kind of stretching out in different directions. But then there's also vibrations that come from crystal lattice vibrations. So like when molecules form a crystal lattice, like a cube of ice, or we're most familiar with like quartz vibrations. Quartz has a lattice vibration that's very consistent, and we based time clocks off of it for a very long time. Things in a lattice will vibrate at a certain frequency. And there's different things that cause these vibrations, like there's just an inherent thermal energy that exists in an atom. Is that what he's talking about?
I don't know what the man's talking about. He sounds crazy.
He is crazy, but...
No, he's not crazy.
Well...
It's just he's challenging the status quo, and nobody likes that, okay? When you challenge what is, you get called crazy.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, that's kind of the definition of crazy,
no.
Right? The definition of crazy is not according to the status quo, an outlier, right? I'm crazy. You're crazy. He's crazy, because we don't follow the status quo. We're not just grilling brats and watching the football game right now. Whatever sporting event is happening.
Right. Well, you gotta look at it this way. If it's vibrating, it's making a sound, right? So,
well, okay.
That maybe I don't know how he's looking at it because I don't know the man.
Yeah, so let's define sound.
Okay.
Sound is a thing that we perceive as humans because we have eardrums which vibrate with the vibration of air in our atmosphere, which is made up of a certain molecular structure of mostly nitrogen and some oxygen, carbon dioxide, and then, 15 other different things. But if that atmosphere vibrates in such a way that it creates compression waves which move our eardrums in a perceivable frequency range, which is very limited for us because we have a very limited hearing range as humans, then we have a brain which can interpret that through the movement of chemical ions down our nervous system to our brain, and we call that sound. That is the definition of sound. We as humans have expanded that definition of sound.
Sound is energy you can hear. Color is energy you can see. Temperature is energy you can feel.
As heat, I guess you could say, or cold. Yes. And we've expanded that to say all of the life forms on Earth also have a frequency range of sound that they can hear and detect. And that is different than ours, and so we'll include that as well. But if you expand that to the universe and atoms and other shit that's much bigger or much smaller than us, the concept of sound kind of breaks down. The frequency of a molecule's vibration is so far out of the range of sound that we could possibly perceive. It doesn't really make sense.
Out of perceivable range, but it doesn't mean it can't be heard by something.
Well, maybe by another atom or another molecule, but
Right, okay, so another atom hears it and, oh, that sounds like me. I need to go over there and check it out.
but those things don't have brains, so they can't hear it. It's not sound.
You don't know that. You have it has some level of consciousness or it would not fucking be doing what it's doing.
No, I don't know if I agree with that.
No.
I'll say that it vibrates, and I'll say that vibration can have an effect on its local environment around it. At some level, when a nitrogen atom vibrates, it's gonna vibrate the next nitrogen atom beside it. I'll agree with you there. And things in their elemental structure are vibrating off each other. The wood and the desk table in front of me, it's all vibrating, and all of its vibrations affect the vibrations of all the molecules around it. But I'm not going to say that that's a sound, because the desk is not making a sound. It is vibrating, and it is
making a sound you can't hear because it's outside of your range.
But it's not really making
Are you sure? I mean, is it? You have no way of knowing.
Let's define sound. Sound is the movement of air around us, or the medium that we're in, because sound can't exist in other mediums. There is sound in water, and there is sound in a pure atmosphere of hydrogen. There would be some vibration of that maybe you could call sound, but let's just call it a vibration of matter. Is that what you're saying is sound? Is that what he's talking about? He's talking about a frequency vibration of the medium in which the element exists. Because a thing vibrating on its own does not make sound. A thing vibrating, the air around it, and then that air being perceived by some other life form. It's our brain that makes the sound. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's not the movement of the air. It's our brain that makes the sound.
No, the brain receives the sound. It doesn't make the sound.
No, the brain perceives the sound.
Well, that's what I mean. It receives.
It doesn't receive it, it perceives it.
Because that's all you are, is a walking receiver.
Well, I'm a walking perceiver. When I say I think what you mean is my consciousness. And what I mean by my consciousness is the thing that my brain tells me is reality.
Your consciousness may be a perceiver, but your body is a receiver. Because all that shit's bouncing off of it, you know.
I think you're speaking in a different term.
Well, it's all a matter of semantics, and who has the correct perception of semantics, you know. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of another.
Yes.
I knew this was going to be a hard topic to discuss, especially with you.
Well, I'm just trying to define terms. We're not even getting into the discussion. Let's talk about what it is that we're talking about.
We can't define the terms. We have to define them for us.
Exactly.
And we don't know how he's defining them, so it's kind of a relative.
I think he's defining them in the way that you mean. I think that's what he's saying. I think he's saying that there is a vibration on an elemental level, and he's saying that things that vibrate in a certain octave, he says they're all the same thing.
He's having the same trouble expressing it, that we are understanding it. You see what I'm saying? Because we don't know where that man's coming from, what exact perspective he has.
Now we will take a break for some advertisements. Please support our sponsors. Just imagine this could be your advertisement. Please reach us at TheBlindAlchemyPodcast@gmail.com to provide sponsorship. And now, back to the show.
And we're trying to relate to it in what we can understand, and we're not understanding it the way he does. Is the problem with all communication in general.
Well, I think there's also the problem of 100 years of scientific education that disproves this theory.
I don't think you're right about that, especially when you go, hey guys, look here and you'll find some cool shit, and they look there and find some cool shit.
Right, and again, all science builds on all science. When I say disproves, I don't mean disprove, I mean adds to. That's what I mean. Our education was in a time that this concept of...
But this stuff was ignored.
Maybe.
It was used, stolen from, but wholly ignored. So what if it hadn't been wholly ignored? Where would we be now? What would be our advancement?
Would it be advanced? That's a good question.
Look at it this way. Tesla was ridiculed and laughed at as an idiot and a fool, right? But our current world is built on everything that man did.
In some ways.
So if we had built our world off this particular elemental table, then how different would it be?
Yeah, I don't disagree with the fundamental idea that all things in the universe are created in such a way that they share things with each other. And I do really like the concept of viewing this as a wave pattern or a circular pattern or a spiral pattern, as opposed to the square periodic table, which I think is ridiculous in the same way that they're talking about. Things don't exist in squares.
Right.
But I would argue that even further, things don't exist in octaves. The octave is something that we created as a measure to quantify a thing that we wanted to fit into easy boxes. But if you look at octaves themselves, they don't work. The mathematic of octaves and music...
Well, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but we didn't really invent these things, okay? Okay, if you take mathematics, if you take the Platonic solids, they are attributed to being created by Plato. They were not. They have found examples of the Platonic solids that predate him by 3,000 years.
Sure.
Same goes with Pythagoras. Same goes for that guy.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
All science builds on all science.
It's a rediscovering of really old shit. Okay. Whatever happened to mankind at whatever point in whatever history or however many times it happened, because God only knows that. We had a whole bunch of knowledge, and then boom, something happens and we lost it, and we're back in the fucking caves again. And boom, we got more knowledge, and boom, we're back in the fucking caves again. And how many times did that happen? How much of it was lost, and how much of it is being rediscovered through really weird shit like, a dream, a fucking meditation. I'll give you an example. I'm sure I have. I don't know if I've talked about it on the show with you, that during meditation, really weird things happened to me, right?
Sure.
Where I could see with my eyes closed, like I had my eyes open, right? Okay, now, this is a new one. This happened like a week or so ago. I was in meditation, eyes closed, dark everywhere. Okay, and then all of a sudden, basically what I'm doing is I'm picturing a flame above me. And all of a sudden, I can see the flame, right? Okay? And I can see more than the flame. I can see this wave, kind of like the Predator vision, He saw heat. I could see everything in the fucking room, but I didn't see it in color. I saw it like in a blue wave would go over it and illuminate it. And I could see my whole body this way. I could see the little flames above each one of my chakras. I could see the doorway. I could see the edge of the bed. I could see the dog on the bed, all with just whatever the fuck that was.
Interesting.
My eyes were completely closed. It wasn't in eyeball color. It was in this blue color.
And you don't believe that this was just your imagination conjuring a memory, or your imagination creating a new description of reality? You think that this is a different form of vision, a different form of perception that you've reached by using your third eye, perhaps? That's
the assumption I'm operating on. I don't think it's my imagination.
That's very cool.
The last time I saw with my eyes closed, one of them I saw in color, vivid eyeball color. I saw through matter.
Wow. What did you see through?
I was outside meditating and I had a blanket and I could see, with my eyes closed, I could see myself sitting on the blanket. I could see the colors in the blanket. Then I could see through the blanket to the grass underneath it. I could see the dirt and the grass in vivid color.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm envious.
Envious.
I want to have these experiences. I'm being completely honest with you. I'm not kidding at all. That would be amazing.
Sit still, breathe. Sit still and breathe. Be still and know, I guess. I can't do it as much as I used to be able to. It's harder now for some reason. Maybe because it's becoming more and more complex. But that whole experience was really weird because, like I said, I could see a flame above each chakra. At first, I could see it in the color of the chakra. And then once I saw all the flames, everything became this blue radar-like color, and I could see it in like a pulse, like
Wow.
coming out almost from above me, if you would. But it was kind of like that. And I could see everything.
Wow, that's amazing. Are you saying that to relate it to this sort of vision that Walter Russell had, or are you saying that through these levels of meditation, there are things that we can perceive in reality that we cannot perceive with our other senses?
Yeah. I would agree with that.
The second one?
Yeah.
Or both?
Yeah, well, maybe both. But definitely the second one.
Yeah. Okay. I can't deny that because I think that each of our perceptions of reality is the perception that we have and that we believe in. And there's what we consider to be practical reality or the collective consciousness of reality
Okay.
that exists to the collective consciousness. You know, the things that all the humans tell all the other humans are the things that exist and that everybody agrees upon. Like, we all fundamentally agree upon the fact that the air has water in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it rains. So we believe that's part of reality. And, you know, if we lived at a different time, we might believe that that's a God that is the spirit of the wind instead of water in the air or whatever. And that it's the spirit of the wind that causes the storms to come. And that would be our collective reality if we lived in that time and place. We all have this collective reality. And then there's always been people that have a different perception of that collective reality, that have a different perception from that collective reality. And they've said things to other people. Perhaps they've said they're psychic, or perhaps they've said they've had interactions with extraterrestrial beings, or perhaps they've said that they've had interactions with angels or gods, or perhaps they've said they've had interactions with who knows what, little people that come and visit them in the night, little sprites or elves or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, there's people that have seen Bigfoot. And so there's also people that have made claims to have those experiences for the sake of vanity or fame or fortune or what have you. And those people cause the rest of the collective consciousness to doubt others who make claims that seem outlandish, like, for example, Terrence Howard, or, you know, maybe Walter Russell, or your psychic who has a tarot reading booth down the street or whatever. But I love the idea that there are these different experiences of reality, and I hold to the truth that each of our perception of reality is just that. It's a story that we tell ourselves. So that's what I'll say about all that. I think that's amazing that you have those experiences, and I can either claim that they...
I don't think I've ever really told anybody about this one, but I will tell you this one. Let me see what you think about this one. So I'm sitting in meditation, and then suddenly someone appears in front of me. Basically a white light color robe, crown, beard. He says, "I am the master," and then shoves a sword of light into my head and turns it like a key and pulls it out.
Wow.
And then he vanished. Now, what do you make of that one? See, I think in meditation, you have a heightened conscious awareness. So you can perceive things that you wouldn't ordinarily perceive with your five senses. And this is the space in between what we know and everything else that we don't know. So that's how the information gets to us. It bleeds through in these weird altered states of awareness. So it bleeds into it's like a dream state or a theta state, beta state, alpha state, whichever one is the one that really gets the groove going, the flow state. And it leaks to us and it gets into the current collective consciousness and raises it just a little bit. And I think somebody's trying to put a cap on conscious awareness so we don't live up to our full potential as humanity, as a collective.
I originally got into meditation back when I was much younger because I was interested in the ideas of expanding consciousness and expanding perception and trying to see what I thought at the time was the real world. Because at the time I thought that there was the world of the collective consciousness and something else that was the real world, which was objective reality, and that was something different. And I spoke to some guys that were into meditation and they were really good at breathing exercises. And they told me about psychedelic experiences and the expansion of consciousness through psychedelics like lysergic diethylamide or peyote or psilocybin.
Mm-hmm.
And they said to me, there are experiences that you can have on those drugs, but they're very different than the type of experiences that you can have while in meditation if you learn to control your breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have hallucinations that appear to be much more real and much more grounded, because when you're on a hallucinogenic substance, rarely do you ever become so detached from your brain that you're not able to perceive that you're on a hallucinogenic substance. And they said, if you're on LSD and you have a trip, you know that you're on a trip. And you can say to yourself, I'm having a hallucination right now. This must not be real. This is a hallucination. But if you experience what they called hallucinations, and I'm using their word, not mine, when they were meditating through rhythmic breathing exercises, they said those hallucinations are on a different level, because they said you can't perceive that it's hallucination because it's you, it's your brain, it's your experience. So it seems much more real. That's how they described it. And I wonder if that might be what you're experiencing. Maybe it is a higher form of consciousness, but maybe it's also just sort of like opening those dream channels of the brain, which are closed to us in our waking life, because our brain protects us from our dreams.
Mm-hmm.
We have this blood-brain barrier because when we process the acetylcholine in our brains, if our bodies were totally available to our brains, we would do things like sleepwalk.
We would act out our dreams, yeah.
Yeah, we hurt ourselves very badly, which happens to some people that have sleepwalking, but those parts of their brains don't fully disconnect from them when they're dreaming, and so they get up and walk around and do all these things. I wonder if that's something that you're opening that channel to, and I'm not saying that's neither real or it's a hallucination or whatever. I'm just saying maybe that's something that you're able to open the channel to because you become that good at meditation. I only had that experience once or twice. It was not at all as protracted as what you describe.
I don't know. They feel extremely real to me. Well, I am more than willing to do a part 2 to this, but I think we're going to stop here and maybe go forth and do more looking into this, because this is exactly what I was hoping would happen, is that it would intrigue you enough to dig deeper.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Let's have another discussion on it. Let's make this a 17-part series, like not 6. Oh, I think this is good.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's enjoyable. And I'm going to look more into Walter Russell. I started the Universal 1, and it was a lot of what? Pause. What the fuck does that mean? Look up this. Okay, play another sentence or two later. What? Okay.
Yeah, I could see that in just that very short 2-paragraph. Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here. Thank you, Blind Alchemist. Truly enjoy myself. I love you. I hope you don't take it the wrong way. We can disagree without...
Yeah, right. That's what people forget, I think. Just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean I hate you.
That's right.
So, I encourage you to dig deeper. I encourage our listeners to dig deeper. Whatever you find interesting, dive into wholeheartedly until you're sick of it. Until it makes sense or your brain explodes, and then it'll make more sense. Embrace the psychoses just long enough to not stay crazy. That's probably the best thing. You have a good night, John. Have a good night, people out there in frequency land. Be safe, be positive, and look for the light, man. You'll find it.
Love you, ladies and gentlemen. Please hit us up on every social platform you can find.
We would love to receive your feedback and your questions for advice. Please email us or send us a voicemail. Our address is TheBlindAlchemyPodcast at gmail.com. Find, like, review, subscribe, and contact us on Facebook and YouTube at The Blind Alchemy Podcast, all one word. Please subscribe to this podcast on your podcast player. We are available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Anchor.fm/TheBlindAlchemyPodcast. Please tell all your friends, enemies, and any strangers to listen to our podcast. This will help us bring joy to everyone. Text-to-speech services were provided by freetts.com and readloud.net. Some information was provided by wikipedia.org. Various audio clips were located on youtube.com. Please see the episode notes for full attribution. We would like to extend a special thank you to the world's greatest musicians, sound designers, and engineers at HairelineProductions for their help with the composition, performance, editing, production, and recording of both the original music and today's show. Please like their content on SoundCloud/HairelineProductions.